Okay, let me start with this topic, that is control and coordination. Okay, this chapter is revolving around the nervous system and how is it working. So this chapter has got three parts. One is uh, the part where we are explaining about how does the peripheral, so the central nervous system works. That also has been discussed in two different parts. One, how does the spinal cord work, and how does what are the different parts of the brain, and how does the brain work. And then it is followed by the control and coordination in plants, hormones, plant hormones, animal hormones. These kinds are also, of things are also covered in this topic, right? Okay. Just give me a second. Let me send a message. Okay. So the control and coordination in different organism happens depending on the complexity of the organism. This is present in almost all the kinds of organisms except the very primitive organisms where this is not required. But at a cellular level, they may also possess control and coordination. But when it is coming to higher organisms, it is actually required to respond to the stimuli. What is a stimuli? Stimuli is okay. Yeah. What is a stimuli? A stimuli is something to which an organism responds. It can be heat, it can be touch, smell, taste, pressure, gravity, or anything like that. Okay, so that can be um, uh, called as a stimuli. Okay, so whenever an organism is coming across these kinds of things, yes, uh, they respond to that. That is what we call as a stimuli, and they develop different techniques for that. Now, there are two major systems working behind it. That is, one is nervous system in case of animals, and the other one is endocrine system. The major difference between the nervous system and the endocrine system is that the nervous system acts very fast in general. In general, they are acting very fast, whereas endocrine systems in general they are slow in nature. Nervous system takes the help of nerves on electric impulses, whereas endocrine system takes the help of blood and chemicals. Okay, so these are the major differences between the nervous system and endocrine systems. They are interdependent on one another and they work on a feedback mechanism, that one is acting on the effect of another one. Okay, that's called a feedback mechanism. When it comes to coordination in animals, both the systems are working. First of all, let us talk about the nervous system. There are two different types of nerves which are helping in it. One is the sensory nerves, which carries messages from a sense organ to the brain, and motor nerves, which are carrying the messages from the brain to the effector organ. So we have some sensory organs, and that sensory organs are what are connected to the sense organs. Okay, or what we call as where we can get some information, and that information can be passed to the brain. So those organs are called as the sensory organs, that include the five senses. And effector organs are those organs which act depending on the information from the brain. There are two major types of effector organ. One, it can be a muscle or it can be a gland. Both of them work based on the information coming from the brain. Okay, now, depending on what sensations are being received, there are different names given. There was one of the question in this pre-board also related to the same thing, that what are the names of these things? Like photoreceptors. Eyes are called photoreceptors and they detect the presence of light. Phono is a word related to sound. That is why the telephone, and telephone, tele means far, Tele means far distance, or tele. This word stands for distance, and phone means sound. So that is why the word came telephone. The phonoreceptors, the sound receptors, they are nothing but the ears. Olfactory receptors, this stands for the smell. The olfactory lobe is the nasal cavity, is also called as olfactory lobe. Sorry, olfactory cavity, and the nerves from there is reaching to the brain directly, and that is there we have the olfactory receptors. That means the smell can be detected there. Gustatory receptors are present on the tongue, or what we call the taste buds, and tango receptors are for the touch. They are spread across the skin throughout our body. So these are the 5 sensory receptors present in our body. The information received by any of these receptors reaches the brain directly, and they can be called as a stimuli. Okay, and the brain responds to that. Hmm. Effector organ are mainly muscles and glands. The entire communication in human being happens, in case of nervous system, it happens through a nerve cell or a neuron. A neuron is a very simple structure with a very specific cell structure. It is very unique. It has got a cytone, and there are some branches coming out of it. One of them is very long, and that can be covered with a myelin sheath, or sometimes it can be without myelin sheath also. Okay, so that is a structure of a nerve cell that we are aware about. The cell body of the nerve cell is what we call as a cytone, and a term which is always associated with nerve is neuro. For example, the cytoplasm is called a neuroplasm. The plasma membrane is called a neurolemma. Okay, so a neuro word is always used as a prefix to whenever we are referring to a nerve cell or a neuron. Okay, now the this is a structure of a nerve cell. This very often is asked for drawing and labeling also. Okay, now how is the messages transmits through the neuron? The smaller branches which are present very nearer to the cytone, they are called as the dendrites, and dendrites receive the messages from the nearby cells, and that messages are normally passed through the cytone to the longest processes, that is called the axon. Axon carries it to the other end of the nerve cell, and then it is passing to the next cell. Now, throughout this distance, the most important or part of the nerve cell are the neurolemma, or the nerve, the plasma membrane of the nerve cell. Now, these plasma membrane are highly specialized. They have some special ion channels. We also call it as the sodium potassium ion channels. And these sodium and potassium ion channels keep on pumping sodium and potassium ions on its both sides, and that is how it develops a membrane potential. It develops a membrane potential. The sodium potassium ion almost channel look almost like this. So for every 3 sodium ions they pump out, they pump in 2 potassium ions. That is how it works. Every 3 sodium ions are pumped out, and 2 potassium ions are pumped in. And because of that, what happens after some transfusions like this, the outer side of the plasma membrane gets filled with a large amount of sodium ions, and the inner side gets filled with many potassium ions. But if we are comparing the number of sodium ions outside and potassium ion inside, the sodium ions on the outer side will be much higher than the potassium ion on the inner side. And because of that, what happens? The outer side attains a positive charge, and the inner side attains a negative charge. So that is how a nerve cell is always charged. And this charge, when a nerve cell is doing no work, not passing any messages, still its membranes are highly charged, and this charge is what we call as a resting potential. And whenever it is receiving a message, there is a disturbance in the resting potential, and that resting potential will keep on passing from one end to the other end. Now there comes a specialized organ part called the synapse. Synapse is the interconnection between two nearby nerve cells, or it can be between a nerve cell and a muscle cell also. The synapse is a physical gap between two nerve cells. The end of the axon, or what we call as the nerve endings, and the beginning of the dendrites, they are not in direct contact with one another, and because of that there develops a gap, and that gap is what we call as the synapse. So that physical gap cannot be crossed by the electric impulses, and for that there's a gap between the two nearby nerve ending and the dendrite. Okay, so to pass this message, this part, there is a specialized chemical reactions happening at the axonal terminal. Only at the axonal terminal there are certain chemicals produced, and these chemicals are called as the neurotransmitters, and these neurotransmitters enter into the synaptic cleft, and that neurotransmitters are received by the next neuron, and then the next neuron can pass the message to the next. And because of that, what happens, the axon can pass a message to the dendrite, but dendrites cannot make these neurotransmitters, so dendrites cannot pass the message to axon. So that makes the nerve cell unidirectional. You can see there is a signal direction. The signal passes from the dendrites to cytone to axon to next dendrite of the next cell. Okay, it cannot go back, it cannot go in reverse. Why? Because only the axonal end can produce the neurotransmitters, and that neurotransmitters will be passed on to the next dendrite. So that is why we call as the nerve cells are always unidirectional. The same thing happens in a neuromuscular junction also. The dendrite, the axon of the last neuron, which is connected to the muscles, they release some chemicals. They are neurotransmitters, and that neurotransmitter will be given to the muscle cells. Muscle cells receive those chemicals, and then it undergoes either contraction or expansion as per the information. Okay, so this is what we call as a neuromuscular junction, where a nerve is connected to the muscle. This picture is there in the textbook also. Sometimes an explanation can be asked: what is neuromuscular junction? How does messages transmit from nerve cell to muscle cell, or how does explain the process of conduction of messages at the neuromuscular junction? Okay, in that case, you will have to explain about how the axonal terminals are producing neurotransmitters, and then how they are being received by the muscle cells, and how these chemicals can either contract or expand the contractile proteins present inside the muscle fibers, and thereby resulting either a contraction or expansion depending on the requirement. Okay, so that need to be explained in detail. Maybe a 2-marker or a 3-marker questions can be asked. Very rarely, though it is not given in the textbook, but in one of the question paper I have seen, name one most common neurotransmitter. You can write this one, acetylcholine. Acetylcholine is one of the most commonly found neurotransmitter. Or else you can also write adrenaline. Adrenaline is a hormone produced by the adrenal gland. Or noradrenaline. This is also a hormone produced by the adrenal gland itself. So any of these things can be written. Other than that, if you can memorize one or two, then that is fine. At least one or two you must be knowing what exactly they are. Okay, not much in detail, only the names. Only the names would be sufficient. Very unlikely to ask, but I have seen that in one of the question papers earlier. Now coming to the next one, that is human nervous system. The human nervous system consists of 3 parts. One is brain and spinal cord. Sorry, let me go through the broader classification. One is central nervous system, peripheral nervous system, and autonomic nervous system. Central nervous system is a physical part of the nervous system. Peripheral nervous system is consists of the nerves arising from that. Again, that is a physical part. Whereas autonomous nervous system is not a physical part; it's a functional part. Okay. So now central nervous system involves the brain and the spinal cord. Peripheral nervous system involves the spinal nerves and the cranial nerves. Cranial nerves means the nerves which are arising from the brain, and the nerves which are arising from the spinal cord. So that are included in the peripheral nervous system. And autonomous nervous system is further divided into two categories. One is sympathetic nervous system and parasympathetic nervous system. And these are mostly based on their functions, not on their structural or physically they are not present. Autonomic nervous system are making use of the parts of the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system itself, but it is in function they differ. That is why we are studying it separately. Now let us study about the central nervous system. It mainly includes brain and the spinal cord. And one of the technique of learning this is to study from the bottom. That means spinal cord first, and then we are moving up to the brain. Okay. Spinal cord is a long uh, structure that is present in between the vertebral column. Spinal cord is not the backbone. It is present in between the backbone. If you are checking the structure of a backbone, there is a hole in between, and the spinal cord passes through that hole, and the nerves are coming out through the gaps in between the two nearby spinal cords or the vertebra. Okay, so it carries messages to the brain, and it serves as one of the major connection between the body and the brain. One of the major thing that we can study in action of spinal cord is reflex action. And those spinal cord is only taking care of passing of messages from different body organs to the brain and vice versa. But at times the spinal cord will take some decisions, but spinal cord is not equipped to think and take a decision. So most of the decisions taken by the spinal cord will be without thinking, and that can be either good or bad. But in extreme conditions, when a quick response is required, then the spinal cord can take a decision and can react or can send messages to effector organs, and that can result in a very quick reaction, which is called as a reflex action. It's a sudden, unconscious, and involuntary response to the effectors to a stimulus. Whenever the body is really receiving a stimulus, and if it is very emergency, then the spinal cord can send a message to the effector organ. But this message will be a sudden message. It is an action taken unconsciously and involuntary. Okay, you have no control over that. Okay, so that creates um, uh, uh, reflex arc. For example, if a pinprick happens on your body, or another example given in the textbook is when you are touching a hot vessel. In either of these cases, the messages can pass through a sensory neuron to the spinal cord. And sensory neuron carries the message all the way to the spinal cord. And this message is supposed to be passed to the brain. The brain is supposed to take a decision on that and then send another message to the effector organ. But in this kind of an emergency situation, waiting for that much time can be extremely dangerous. And because of that, instead of sending that email, that messages to the brain, the spinal cord bypass within that and then pass a message to the motor neurons to an effector organ with the help of a very small neuron connected between the sensory neuron and the motor neuron. That is called an interneuron or a relay neuron. Our textbook is also mentioned as a relay neuron. So this relay neuron or an interneuron interconnects between the two networks, that is the sensory neuron and the motor neuron, and pass the message to the effector organ, maybe the hand muscles, to pull it back. Okay, that results in a sudden pulling back of the hand, or some action will be taken. And this is what we call as a reflex arc. This can happen at another place, say for example in the leg also the same thing can happen, where the spinal cord can take a message, can take a decision and send the message to the leg, and that result in a reflex arc. What is the reflex arc? Reflex arc is arc formed from the stimulus to the receptor organ to sensory neuron to spinal cord, and then taking a U-turn from there to motor neurons, effector organs, and then that result in a response. So this arc which is formed is what we could ask as reflex arc, and this action is called a reflex action. One of the common question that is asked is, there's another way of representing the reflex arc. One of the common question that is asked related to reflex arc is that what is the role of brain in reflex action? Is a very commonly asked question, because at one point it is mentioned that brain does not take part in the reflex arc, but there are some nerves which are coming out from the brain, and if a reflex action happens in those areas, maybe the part above shoulder or something, yes, the brain do take part in that, but the thinking part of the brain does not take part in that, but brain helps in passing the messages to the effector organ without passing it to the main brain for thinking. So in that sense, yes, brain do take part in the reflex arc, but not in the process of thinking, but for passing the messages directly to the effector organs. And only this happens in case of cranial reflections. The cranial is a word associated with the parts associated with the brain. So there are two different types of reflex actions. One is the spinal reflexes. The reflex actions that is happening in those areas where the nerves are connected to the spinal cord. So we call it as the spinal reflections. And the nerve cells which are connected to the brain, if a reflex action happens in those nerves, then we call it as a cranial reflections. Okay, in both the cases, the active involvement or the thinking power of brain is not used, but brain as well as spinal cord behaves the same way in passing the messages directly to the effector organs. That is how the reflex action happens. A detailed this can be asked, what are the steps involved in the reflex action, or explain the entire process of reflex action, draw a picture and explain. You need to be extremely careful while attempting this question whether a reflex arc has been asked or the picture of a reflex action has been asked. So if it is a reflex arc, you can make somewhat what we are seeing on the screen right now, or if it is a reflex action, then you probably will have to draw the picture given in the text. Now jumping over to the next one, that is human brain. Human brain can be studied in different ways. One of the simplest method that has been adopted in the textbook is dividing the brain into three parts. And one is the forebrain, midbrain, and hindbrain. Forebrain is the part when you are taking the brain on the upper side all the way on the top. Then that is what we call the forebrain. The diagram of brain as given in the textbook can be asked. Midbrain is just below that, and hindbrain is the lowermost portion of the brain. So it has been divided very easily into three parts. Let me go for a simple diagram of brain. Yes. Here we can see. According to the textbook, this much portion is coming under the forebrain, this much outermost region. This is considered as the forebrain, and the lower regions may be somewhat here is the midbrain, and this much portion which is beneath that or the lower side is considered under the hindbrain. So the forebrain majorly involve all the major part of the brain or the largest part of the brain, that is the cerebrum. Cerebrum is the largest portion, and the midbrain mainly includes the thalamus, hypothalamus, pituitary gland, and all the nearby places. The upper part of the brain stem, or what we call as the midbrain, all these things are involved together in the midbrain. The lowermost portion includes the pons, which is the upper side of spinal cord, or what we call as the medulla oblongata, pons, and the cerebellum, which is on the lower side. That is also included in the hindbrain. Okay. In this picture also we can say, yes, what we are seeing is majorly this, all these things are the forebrain part. We can't see the midbrain in this because it is deep seated inside. If I am removing this bluish portion, probably on the inner side I can see the midbrain, and some part of the hindbrain is visible, that is the cerebellum, and the lower portion, yes, that is visible in this picture, right? So the textbook picture is good for explaining all those portions. Fine. The human brain is highly protected, and it is protected in a skull, and there are three different layers of bones in this brain. And for study purpose, we can study them as dura mater, arachnoid, pia mater. It's very thick. It's very thick. Skull is very thick. It is not very easy to break. There are 8 bones joined together and forms a very thick structure. Moreover to that, in between the upper 2 layers are fused together. Below that, there is a layer of a cavity is there, and in that fluid is filled, and that fluid is called the cerebrospinal fluid. And the cerebrospinal fluid is covering the entire outer region of the brain, or we can say the brain is actually floating in the cerebrospinal fluid, and this helps us to feel a little lighter weight, because our brain is actually very heavy, around 1.5 kilos, and holding that on your small neck, it can be extremely tiring. So this covering it with or keeping it floated in a liquid will make you feel a little lighter in weight, and it also protects the brain from shocks and jerks. It gives buoyancy to the brain, and it also helps in easy transport of salts and minerals, so that the entire brain works on nerve cells, and nerve cells work on sodium potassium ion pumps. And if these ions are not distributed equally in the entire brain, that can result in major problems. If a person is suffering from low sodium potassium ion levels, then that person's brain will start creating hallucination, that the person will start hearing sounds which are not there, start seeing things which are not there. Okay, so these all are the entire brain becomes imbalanced, and these all are the old memories of the person comes alive, and the person feel that it is still happening in front of their eyes. Okay, so this normally happens at a very old age, when the people are not even able to support the basic functions of the brain. Okay. Yes. Now, medulla oblongata is the lowermost portion in the um, hindbrain, and let us study from the bottom. The lowermost portion of the hindbrain is medulla oblongata, which is on the uppermost side of the spinal cord, and this is the regulatory center for heartbeat, permitting all the involuntary functions, whichever is supposed to be to keep on going, and that is normally controlled by medulla oblongata, especially when we are sleeping, when our main brain is not active. At that time, this medulla oblongata comes into action. Like blood pressure, sneezing, vomiting, swallowing, hiccups, these are not in our control. They are all involuntary functions. And above that, we have another region which is slightly broader than the medulla oblongata, which technically we call it as a pons. And this is the place where interconnections between the main brain and the cerebellum you can find. And this center is also responsible for controlling the rate of breathing and arranging the head as per stimuli, controlling the neck muscles. Okay, and they act as a major link between the main brain and the cerebellum, which is situated at the back side. Midbrain is mainly involved in sensory neurons, or just above that. This is present slightly below the uh, uh, pituitary gland, or we can call it as it is a part of the midbrain as per the textbook. There we can find there are centers which can control the different feelings like the touch, the hearing, sight, the connections from the eyes. These are collected there for further process. Just above that, as per the textbook, it is in the midbrain. Midbrain has got two major parts. One is thalamus and hypothalamus. Hypothalamus is considered as one of the very important part in the brain. Thalamus is completely a part of the nervous system, and this is normally present in the midbrain. And this centers, thalamus can detect many information of the body. That means it can act as a monitoring system. And once the monitoring system identifies the conditions of the body, it gives messages to the hypothalamus, and hypothalamus can control pituitary. It is hypothalamus that is also producing a hormone, and that hormone is called the releasing hormone. And this releasing hormone can trigger pituitary gland. There was a question related to this in the last pre-board. Why is pituitary called as a master gland? Some students got confused between the releasing hormone or that activity of hypothalamus and pituitary gland. They are two different things. One is hypothalamus can produce releasing hormone that can trigger that can trigger pituitary gland for production of many other hormones. But which one is considered as the master gland? Pituitary gland is considered as the master gland. Why? Because it can produce, some students have written the reason for this as that it can produce growth hormone and can control the growth of the body. No, that is not the reason. Pituitary gland can produce chemicals which controls other hormones, other glands. For example, it produces TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, that will control the functioning of the thyroid gland. It can produce, say, FSH, follicle stimulating hormone, which can control the functioning of the ovaries and the testicles. Okay, there are many such ADH, sorry, ACTH, adrenocorticotropic hormone, which can control the kidney and the um, uh, glands above it, that is the adrenal glands. Okay, so there are many glands which are under the control of the pituitary gland. That is why pituitary gland is considered as the master gland. Anyway, that is a part of the endocrine system. Just by the way, I just told that. So hypothalamus also has a great influence on the entire nervous system, and hypothalamus can control pituitary, or it actually can release a hormone called the releasing hormone and can trigger the functions of pituitary gland. Okay, so that is why it can also maintain an internal homeostasis. Internal homeostasis means there should be a coordination between different organs. That when the heartbeat increases, automatically the respiration rate should also increase. Okay, so the muscle should get activated. So anything that is when one system start functioning faster or slower, the other system should also respond to that, and that controlling between the different systems of the body is actually controlled by hypothalamus. Okay, that is how it is helpful. So this is the entire structure of the lower part of the brain. This much portion can be considered hypothalamus, the first one. This much portion can be considered in the midbrain, and the lower portion is in the hindbrain. One of the major organ in the hindbrain is the cerebellum. Cerebellum is situated slightly towards the backside of the brain, which is also called as the small brain. Why? Because it majorly takes the functions of the main brain when the main brain is not functioning. Okay, so there is also an important part of this. I have, if we are taking a cross section of that, it appears almost like this. When it comes to the main brain or the large brain, or we call it as the front brain. It majorly consists of four major lobes, and it appears grayish from the outer side and white from the inner side, mainly because of the overgrown uh, dendrites of the neurons on the upper side, whereas its axons are situated towards the lower side. So from outer side, it appears gray in color, which is called as the cerebral cortex, and on the inner side, it appears white in color, which is called as the cerebral medulla. There are some curves, ups and downs also. This can be skipped because it's not there in the textbook. For study purpose, we have divided them into four major lobes or parts. One is the frontal lobe, which controls the entire thinking activity. All the voluntary actions are taken from here. The decisions are taken from here. But this works only in the conscious state, when we are awake, when we are thinking, and by our knowledge, full control of our brain, when we are doing something, then this part of the brain is active. Another part is the parietal lobe. They are helping in experiencing the touch, pressure on skin and pain, to identify it, to evaluate its how intense it is, and depending on that, providing message to the frontal lobe. Then we have the central lobe, which processes majorly the auditory signals and the olfactory signals and audiovisual signals. That means the major informations from the uh, uh, ears, nose, and eyes are actually processed in this field. Okay, and occipital lobe is mainly for vision and bilateral vision center. That means we have two eyes, and both the eyes capture two different pictures, and both the pictures are sent to the brain, and in the brain, both the pictures will be superimposed, and then it creates a three-dimensional picture, and that is actually done in the occipital lobe. Okay, so these are the major parts of the central nervous system. The peripheral nervous system consists of majorly the nerves arising from the central nervous system. That includes very long network that is coming out from the spinal cord and the cranial nerves. We have included them in the reflex action. The sensory neurons and the motor neurons, which are represented in the reflex actions, are actually a part of the peripheral nervous system. Now, when it comes to the autonomous nervous system, this is the functioning of both of them. Now, how do they function? There are two major autonomous nervous system. One is considered as the sympathetic nervous system, and the other one is considered as the parasympathetic nervous system. As the name suggests, when the sympathetic nervous system is activated, the body's condition is very pathetic, because it is passing through, the body will be passing through some difficult conditions. Maybe an exam is going to happen, or you are studying, you're one day before the exam, or it can be you are waiting for something and you are in a tensed mood. Then what are the effect of sympathetic nervous system? I think about 4 or 5 years back, there was a question in the board exam itself: what are the effects of sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system on some special organs? They have given some names, like, for example, what is its effect on liver, what is its effect on stomach, what is its effect on heart, lungs. These kinds of, there were at least 3 or 4 organs were given. Now, how do sympathetic nervous system affect different parts? First and foremost thing, it dilates pupils. That means the eyes the inside the eyes we have the pupil. Pupil normally remains contracting and expanding depending on the availability of the light. But here, when the sympathetic nervous system are activated, it dilates more, so that more light can be taken in. You can see things more clearly. Yes, and the eyes are trying to collect more information. Inhibit salivation. You might have experienced this when you are preparing for exams, you start feeling thirsty. Why? Because saliva production decreases, relaxes bronchi. That means the bronchi wall, they relax and they expand, and that widens the bronchi, and that takes in a lot of oxygen, or the breathing rate increases, accelerate the heartbeat, and it inhibits peristalsis and secretions. This is a very important thing that you must be aware about. When you are nearer to an exam, your body is not working properly. Its sympathetic nervous system will be active, and according to that, it inhibits peristalsis and the secretions of the digestive juices. That means you are more prone to develop an upset stomach. Avoid having heavy foods from outside when nearer to an exam, and have simple food, smaller amount of food, but at regular timing, and proper diet, without including heavy food or anything. Include more of easily digestible food that contains more carbohydrate, glucose, or sugars, like chocolates or something like that can be extremely good. That can be digested very easily. Chocolate doesn't mean that the milk chocolates and all. It can be toffees or something like that, which contains more of glucose. Okay, and it inhibits peristalsis, stimulates glucose production and release. That means the stored food from the body will be utilized. Adrenaline and noradrenaline levels will be higher. That will keep your muscles ready for any actions. Inhibits bladder contraction. The urine production will be reduced, and it will inhibit bladder contraction. So you need to be careful about your water intake also. Okay. Whereas on the other side, when parasympathetic nervous systems, you can find that and the people constrict, just opposite to what we have seen in sympathetic nervous system happens in parasympathetic nervous system. That is why a student can sit in an exam hall and write a 3-hour exam continuously without going to washroom. But if you are watching a movie, maybe after 1.5 hour or so, there will be a break. Why? Because the urinary bladder contracts and the kidney produce more urine. Because you are relaxing, your body behaves differently. You feel hungry. Why? Because you are relaxing. Your parasympathetic nervous system is active, and uh, your peristalsis and the secretions in the stomach increases, and as a result, what happens? Your body start feeling hungry. Okay, slower breath, heartbeat, and almost the body is taking rest. Okay, so this is what happening in a parasympathetic nervous system. When it comes to coordination in plants, plants are controlled by 5 major hormones: auxins, gibberellins, cytokinins, abscisic acid, and ethylene. These are the 5 major hormones that control the plant growth. And out of that, auxins are majorly helping in cell division. Wherever auxin or auxin-like materials are present, then it will trigger cell division. They are majorly helping in growth-related movements, like the tropisms are controlled by auxins. Gibberellins majorly helps in increasing the length of the cells. Cytokinin helps auxins in cell division, though cytokinin may not be enough for triggering auxins directly, or sorry, cell division directly. They will take the help of auxin in coordination with auxin, or in the absence of auxins, cytokinins can trigger cell division. Majorly, they are helping in branching of the plants. The branches are mainly due to. Okay. I shall pick up this part later. Then I am stopping here for the questions related to nervous system. Any queries related to nervous system in human being or anything? If you can access your mic, you can ask me or can use the chat box.